what's your background in terms of space? Where did your interest come from? In terms of NASA, the stars, anything along those lines?
Sure. Well, I was captivated by the stars and by the universe as a little kid. I was shown by our next door neighbor who had an old brass telescope that had been bought for him by his grandfather in 1910 to look at Halley's Comet when it blazed through the sky. And I was a little boy. This man who was our next door neighbor, he was an ophthalmologist, an eye doctor, used to take out this telescope. And one night he had it out and he showed me the moon, and it was first quarter moon, so you could see all the craters, and peering through that, it just blew my mind, just completely captivated. I mean, of course, it's a story like the one that one of the people tells in the film. I mean, it happens. There are these spark moments where you see something, it just blows you away. Like, that's another world that really exists there. And there are these huge craters on it, and it has this strange light. And of course, when I was, still also a little kid, I got to see you're way too young for this, but I saw the astronauts walking on the moon, the moonwalk, when I was in pajamas as a little kid. And it just, once again, it's one of those things that you just say, oh my God, that's real. This isn't science fiction. This is real. So there was that. So, and then I used to build little telescopes when I was in high school. And so I became just completely fascinated with astronomy and space. And I got to meet Matt Mountain, who is in this film, and was at that time the head of the Space Telescope Science Institute. He's now head of AURA, which oversees a lot of our telescopes, the university telescopes in the world, and also some of the space telescopes. He told me a little bit more about, of course, I was fascinated by Hubble, but then he told me about this new telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope, that had then already been a while in development. And I said, boy, would I like to film that being built, because it's like one of these great projects, like building a cathedral or something like that, that takes many generations. So I've been filming the building of Webb for a while. And, it's something that as a documentary filmmaker, it's such a privilege to be able to watch something unfolding through time. And you get to see not only something like a telescope coming together, but also the people involved with it and how they change, and how they have to, keep sort of sticking with something, even though it's taking forever. And, all those qualities that I think we really come to admire about these huge projects. And NASA projects is certainly top of the list, that take many generations even to fully realize. So I've been fascinated by space for a long time. And then to be able to make this about a telescope, that is grand and amazing and aspirational and inspirational as Webb, is just like, dream come true. So it puts together my love of astronomy and, of course, my profession of documentary filmmaking.
So how did the editing process work for you then? If you've been working on this for so long, and I know in execution, it comes out as such a character-driven story. I'd love to hear how it all pieced together for you.
Sure. Well, the editor that I work with is named Sabina Krayenbuhl, and we've done 3 films together. We did My Architect together, and we did The Price of Everything together, and we did this film together. And she also does her own films. So we have a shorthand, but it's also a longhand, because these films take a long time to put together. But our dialogue is very much, I'm interested in making films that are, as you say, character driven, that are composed really of scenes more than interviews. So an interview for me, like a strict interview, is just like really not, it's very, very difficult for me. This idea of sitting down and having a conversation seems very artificial a lot of times.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, right. Okay. I know. But there's nothing more wonderful than actually intersecting with somebody when they're doing something, when they're engaged in doing something, even something as simple as driving a car. But when it's building a telescope or setting up a telescope, or in the case of, The Price of Everything, making a piece of art, suddenly people are talking and doing, and it becomes this visual thing. So Sabina and I, when we work together, we look for scenes. We look for things something which kind of has its own integrity as a little kind of dramatic capsule. And we'll edit those things first. So, not even sure how those things are going to go together. And then, you have the basic concept of where you want to go, but things start to come together in, I'm blown away by the picture of persona that you have behind you there.
The Bergman set.
That's as good as it gets right there. I mean, you're killing me here. Like, what am I even talking about being a movie maker when you got that behind you? But the thing is that, so we find these pieces, we start to put them together, and they start to talk to each other. So the process of editing really is finding the story, but even more than the story, finding the emotional resonances between these scenes. And then, it would be a nightmare for me to film everything and then say, oh, now we make the film. We start to put these things together, and then I go out and film new things based on what we're discovering, so that the story is really growing organically, along the way. But in this case, of course, we also had the timeline of building the telescope. So that helped to kind of be the string on which these pearls could be threaded. But in answer to your question, it's looking for the scenes and then how they talk to each other, and then building it out from there. But sometimes things will happen, like, for instance, the climate march is happening during the period of making the film that resonate in a way that I did not expect at all. So to bring those elements in, one of the things that I think is so wonderful about documentary filmmaking is that it's unpredictable. And that I think, the documentary films that I most admire are films where you just really don't know what's going to happen next. Many times because the filmmaker didn't know what was going to happen next, and that's a great joy. And I think sometimes in narrative filmmaking, not the best narrative filmmaking, but too much narrative filmmaking, we kind of know where it's going to go. And I like the films that really surprise me.
I thought it was fascinating, actually, Amy Lowe, that as you talked about finding these sort of organic ways, I'm curious, what the relationship was like with her, because I thought it was so interesting how you introduced her and sort of digging in on a car, just going to work, doing, I guess she has her amateur racing on the side. I'm fascinated to hear sort of more about that relationship, what it was like working with her. She seemed one of the most interesting people that you focused on in the filming.
Amy's amazing. And I think that one of the things is that I wanted to make a science film that didn't feel like a science film. And I think that the key for that is because it's character, is getting to know the people. So with Amy, when we were talking, we were just talking in her office, and she was showing me this wonderful Lego model, which was fun in and of itself, that she used Lego to build, a little model of the Webb telescope, and that's actually helpful, to her to think about stuff using Lego. How wonderful is that? We started talking, and I said, well, what else do you do? And she said, oh, well, I race cars. And I said, all right, that's what we want to film, So also this wonderful sort of contrast between the extreme precision of the James Webb Space Telescope, which has to be right the first time. No mistakes can be made, no room for errors, and you don't really, you're not touching it, compared to these kind of junker cars that Amy and her husband put together, and then race. I mean, literally, they buy a car for $500 or less, like a total junker. They fix it up, and they have this beautiful, like this old Lotus that they got on Craigslist for $500. They fix it up, and then they race it, on these like 24-hour races. That's just, I mean, that's a movie in and of itself. Yeah. So I'm not even doing it justice in the little scene that we had, but at least it shows this kind of, this incredibly fun human side of this. She's a brilliant engineer, who's able to do math in her head that I can't even dream of.
I'm not sure I could do it with a calculator.
Me either. I wouldn't even know how to think about it. But that contrast, once again, it's a character-driven film. So just being able to get to know these people a little bit. And there's so many characters in the film. Unfortunately, I couldn't go in as deeply as I would have liked to with all the characters. But at least you get a taste for what an interesting and unusual person she is.
Yeah. One of the other women who really resonated for me, I'd heard of her before, is Jill Tarter. I thought,
sure. I don't know if you know the film.
Yep, I do.
Sure, it's a great film.
But I was curious, how you came to the relationship with her, and almost
Yes.
what it was like to sit with her, because I found her sort of philosophy of the world, the way she described things, her sort of 8-ounce cup analogy. I just thought she had a way of bringing things together that was, it was just very interesting, and I imagine it must have been fascinating to have the chance to pick her mind.
It was amazing. Jill is one of the most direct people I've ever met. I mean, she's a little scary to me, because she's like so direct. So when I asked her a question, she's like, oh, basically she's like, Nathaniel, what I think doesn't matter. We're doing science here. It's what we find out. I mean, she's like so direct, immediately breaking that fourth wall. Something else that I love, I love to find a moment in a film where somebody turns it right around on you and kind of, breaks this idea that a documentary filmmaker is somehow like, and this interviewer who's coming in and is totally inert, and so I love that moment where she throws it right back at me. But talking to her was really remarkable, because she's a person who's gone through so many different sort of chapters in her life, where in the beginning, something like SETI, as she says in the film, considered a rather fringy organization, this idea of listening for extraterrestrial signals. And, to see somebody who's worked that long and that hard, and also breaking the glass ceiling in many ways as a woman in these fields, where, people would say, what's a nice girl like you doing doing in this field, which, I mean, is ridiculous. But those are the things that she was up against. So to be able to see that, and then to see now where we have these, incredible astronomers, women, many women in the field, especially in the field of exoplanets. And she was really the pioneer. So being able to be with a pioneer and talk to her about these questions was very moving. It was also humbling, in the sense that you recognize that one of the qualities a scientist like that has to have is that you may not find out in your own lifetime the answers to the questions that you are obsessed by. And that is that is something that sort of gives you this I don't know, this hope for humanity, that that if people can begin to think more that way, that we really do have an obligation to leave this world better than the way we found it. I mean, that's something we should be really aspiring to. And the idea that we're willing to do things that we ourselves may not fully be able to reap the benefits of, that we have to do it because it's part of what we do as human beings. We do things that are hard, we do things that are difficult, we do things that are going to take many generations to achieve. So talking to Jill, constantly made me think of that science is something that is really this kind of overarching human project that's reaching out into the dark to try to understand who we are, where we came from, where we're going. And of course, in the case of Jill, perhaps certainly one of the greatest questions we've ever asked: are we alone? And and I'm sure as a young scientist, she thought, we're going to find this, we're going to find it, and yet we still don't know. So, but we are getting closer, and that's the thing about something like James Webb, that it really is a game changer.